Well, the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg is today calling for tighter border controls and the reintroduction of exit checks. Tony Smith is a former director of the UK Border Force and a consultant for Fortinus, and he joins us from our central London studio. Good to talk to you. In what state do you think British border control is today?
Well, I think the first thing is about your reports in Calais is to just remind people that we have a very strong presence in northern France. We have a number of border force officers working 24/7 round the clock with our colleagues in France to interdict migrants, which is why we have got a strong border there. It does come in waves, and it's very important that the messaging is right to immigrants. If they want to come to this country, they need to pursue the normal channels of applying for visas and permits and not to flock towards the northern French coast, because they will be stopped by our officers, and they end up in pretty appalling circumstances. I think the other thing is that we do need to work very closely with the French authorities, with the European Border Agency and our international partners to get after the gangs, because this is organised human smuggling. This is trafficking that makes money for criminals. It's really, really important that we collaborate with our colleagues in Europe and indeed in source countries to stop this trade and to keep the legal routes for migration open, of course, in accordance with government policy, but to crack down on this human trafficking, which is really a miserable business.
But despite the number of British border officials that are there, people do still get through. Anecdotally, we hear from hauliers who say groups are still managing to get through. I've been down to these camps at Calais and I've spoken to some of those people in those camps, and they just will simply try and try and try and try and try. However many times they get rebuffed or sent back, they'll keep trying, and they will eventually find a way into the UK, legally or illegally.
Well, I'm not sure they will, Jane. I mean, I think you're right. Obviously, with any net, there are holes in it, and there are always going to be people that are going to continue to persevere and may be able to get through. But realistically, if you compare our border in Calais with the rest of Europe, I mean, they don't even have borders. In most European countries, it's a complete free movement zone. So that chap's come up from Italy, others are coming through the Balkans, across the Med, and they are in Europe already. We do have a border with Europe. There are no political parties advocating that we leave that. All parties that I hear of are saying that we want to maintain a very strong presence there. It's very important, though, that we do maintain very good relationships with our colleagues in France, so that things like the Treaty of Sangatte and other conventions that we have with Europe are equally honoured, that we work together on a common purpose, which is to stop illegal migration and to open up legal routes.
What of Nick Clegg's calls for tighter border controls and the reintroduction of exit checks? Is that something you'd welcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been advocating exit checks for some time now. I mean, exit checks are really, really important. The reason they haven't been introduced, Jane, is primarily one of funding. It would cost the Border Force about £30 million a year to do it properly. So although the government, it was a commitment in the coalition agreement to introduce them, but the money was never made available. Things have been done, for example, to empower airlines and security guards to do passport checks legally and to get more information from airlines, certainly on people leaving the country. But the only way to do this properly is to recruit fully trained, properly equipped immigration officers who have access to systems, so that we know who is boarding vessels and vehicles and aircraft going out of the country, and then we can have a proper debate about numbers, because a lot of the debates we've had in the past about numbers have been flawed, because we simply don't know how many people are leaving the country, and if we don't know that, then how can we say how many people are staying here?
How do you judge the way that the coalition has handled border control?
Pretty well, in terms of certainly we put on a really good Olympics, didn't we? I was very much involved in that when I was working in the Home Office. I thought that was an excellent performance. We have very tight checks at the border. There are problems with queues, and I think the big political dilemma for all the parties now is how to manage, intra-EU migration, this freedom of movement thing that enables, European passport holders essentially, when they arrive at our ports of entry, Jane, are treated in the same way as British citizens. There is a watch list check and a document check, but there are no questions asked. Now, if we are going to start examining European nationals to say, well, how long are you staying? What are you coming for? Are you exercising treaty rights? That's going to take time. That's going to build up queues at the border. How are we going to do that? Where's the money coming from? And how are we going to manage the ports? That's what I'd like to see. Some of the detail in some of these policy ideas about managing this freedom of movement and EU national movements, which are growing all the time. We've got increasing numbers of electronic gates, doing checks which essentially are identity and entitlement checks, but not examinations in the way that we examine people coming from outside the EU. If we're going to start doing that, I'd quite like to know the detail of that.
OK, Tony Smith, former Director General of the UK Border Force, good to talk to you.